The Lennon Series with Jude Kessler featuring Should Have Been There and Shivering Inside.
And after about 6 weeks or so, they came to America and played on Ed Sullivan, and the whole country went crazy for them. And I think it was a release from the sadness we were all going through. They were happy, they were head shaking, they were woo and yeah, yeah, yeah. And it gave people something to be joyous about. Now, if you'd ask my friend Al Sussman, Al would probably say, no, that's too simplistic. It was more than that. They were just effing great, and people know when they see great. But part of the psychology was that we wanted to climb out of the unhappiness we were in. We wanted something to be happy about. So, that's part of it. He's asking how was music affected by John Lennon and the Beatles, and we already really discussed that in the how did they change the world thing. I mean, it was never the same again. If you go back and you just say, you put into the internet music of the 1950s and you listen to some of those great crooners of the 50s, whether it's Paul Anka, whether you're listening to Venus in Blue Jeans or any of the songs of the 1950s, they're the crooning, relaxed, soft, let's lower the lights and have cocktails kind of songs. With the Beatles, it's a mad romp. It's stomp your feet and let's dance and let's rip up the roof and let's have a good time. And they just changed the face of music. Women in the songs of the 1950s were idolized. They were angels, they were Venus, they were goddesses. Women of the Beatles songs were real flesh and blood women. When you think about She Loves You, it's a song about a boy going to another guy and saying, look, you're being an idiot. This girl loves you and you're treating her horrible. And if you don't straighten up, you know what, I might just take her away from you. I mean, that's not said, but it's implied. And women become real flesh and blood people who matter, not just idols on a pedestal. And then they become names. They become Rita, and they become real. And that's why women love them so much. Where did John and the Beatles get the motivation to start their band? Well, obviously it's John's band. His mother convinces him that he has that music in his bones. And Pete Shotton and John had both been expelled from school, or suspended, as they called it. I'll hold up for you. This is the first book that I did, and it was called Should Have Been There, and it covers John's life from the time that he's born in October of 1940 through December of 1961, when the Beatles get a manager and leave Liverpool behind. And this is the book, Should Have Been There. In there's the story of how they've been suspended from school. They've been in the headmaster's office, I can't tell you how many times, for one reason or another. And the guy is really a with-it educator. And he decides he's not going to punish them as everyone else has punished them, that he's going to try to be understanding. But finally, he finds out that they've been betting against their own school in sporting events. And he's just had it with them, and he throws them out of school for several weeks. So rather than tell their parents, rather than John telling his Aunt Mimi or Pete telling his mother, they go to John's mother's house, to Julia's house, and they hang out every day and play rock and roll records and dance and drink soda and eat cupcakes and do things that they shouldn't be doing. And that's when she convinces them that they've got to form a band, and that chapter is in Should Have Been There. And John decides he's going to get this mail-order guitar for £5. You can just imagine what that thing was like. And he's going to form this band. So, number one, Julia, huge influence, huge influence. Number two, the skiffle movement. In Liverpool at that time, there was a kind of music that came from blues and from the New Orleans jazz influence and from country music, all rolled into one. You would take a song like Red River Valley, and John's friend Jerry Marsden said you give it the acky-dacky, you kind of jazz it up a little bit. And skiffle was being played by every 14 to 21-year-old in Liverpool, all guys, no girls. They would go into their garage with a broom and a box that they would make into a tea-chest base, and with their mother's washboard and something to scrape against the washboard, or maybe just their nails, and a beat-up guitar, and maybe if they were lucky, a banjo, and they would sit in the garage and they would sing these jazzed-up country and western songs, or country songs, Rock Island Line, and some of these songs. And so skiffle was the beginning. That's where they started. So Julia, skiffle, meeting Paul McCartney, this boy who could tune his own guitar, something John couldn't do, a boy who could remember the lyrics, someone who challenged John, who knew as much or more about music than John did, and made him be better than he was on his own. So Paul, another influence, and Stu Sutcliffe, who taught John that playing rock and roll is not just fun, it's an art. Stu was an art student, and he took his art seriously, and he taught John to take his art seriously, and he inspired John to become greater than he ever would have been if he had known Stu. You know, again, that we could, there are so many things that happened to the Beatles that there's a line from Tennyson, Alfred Lord Tennyson, that says, "I'm a part of all I have met." And John was definitely a part of all those people who gave him a piece and inspired him. At one point, Thomas, they came home from Hamburg, their first tour to Hamburg, and Paul went back to school to become a school teacher. George got a job as an electrician's mate. And, of course, at that time, Ringo wasn't drumming with them. And Pete went about his business. Pete Best went about doing what he did, helping his mom at the Casbah. And John went door to door, pounding on the door and saying, "What are you doing? Why do you have a job? Because we're going to be famous. You can't go to work. We're going to be a great band. We are going to be famous." And so one of the things that made that band great was the determination of John Lennon. You're not going to work. You're going to stay committed to this band. That never say die attitude of we're going to the toppermost of the poppermost. And he was right. They did. Why they decided to break up the band and take on solo careers. You know, when the Twin Towers were hit on 9/11, that afternoon I was driving in my car and I was listening to an architect for the Twin Towers talk about not why did the Twin Towers collapse, but why did they stand as long as they did? Same thing with the Beatles. When John met Paul at the Wilton Garden Fete, and he was told by his friends, "You should ask this guy to join the band," he wouldn't ask him that day. He went home, he sat on his bed, and again, that sin should have been there. And he thought, if I ask this boy to join my band, he is a coup waiting to happen. He will try to take over my band. He's as smart as I am, he's as talented as I am, and he's a leader, and I'm going to have trouble with him. Should I not ask him and preserve my leadership of this band, or should I ask him and become great? Well, he asked him. But from that moment on, the two of them struggle. They struggle as friends, but there's never a moment when they aren't pushing. And so it went for years. This kind, polite fighting that became less and less and less polite until finally it broke up. But the fact that it lasted as long as it did was amazing, because you had two geniuses, and two geniuses in the same room never work. Then you have George Harrison, also brilliant, brilliant man, writing I Me Mine all through the day. I Me Mine, I Me Mine, I Me Mine. He's sick of them. And Ringo quit the band 15 times. Yeah, they would ignore him, or Paul would come in and record a drum track without consulting Ringo, and would just do his own drum track. And routinely, Ringo quit, and then would come back. The fact that you have four brilliant minds working together, you just can't work. There's just no way. Amateur Valley High School. Okay, well, good luck to you and for your teacher, if we can get her to watch this. I think he deserves an A+++++. Okay, keep rocking. Bye.